I know, Alex, we had talked leading up. You were hoping for kind of a big addition for the Blazers. Didn't happen. You okay with that?
No, I'm not. I'm really confused because when we got Hassan Whiteside, I thought the plan the entire time was to use him as a rental until Nurk came back, and then use that contract that was going to expire for Whiteside to entice another team to take him, and then that way we could pick up a player that would help us in an area we need. So when they didn't make a trade, I was really confused.
Yeah, it seems like suddenly the 17.23 rebound, 5 block guy is not very valued. I mean, we saw Andre Drummond, who, if you're a fantasy basketball player, you think Andre Drummond's one of the best players in the league. He's putting up, 20 and 15 type numbers, same kind of thing that Whiteside put up. But we saw him get traded for basically a second-round pick and like John Henson or Dan Henson, one of the Hensons.
Yeah, Detroit kind of showed their hand with that trade because Drummond's contract was going to expire. He probably wasn't going to re-sign with Detroit, and they were trying to get whatever they could for Drummond as soon as they could. So I think they kind of saw the writing on the wall, and Drummond was kind of upset with that. Actually, he took to his Twitter account and he posted some comments about how he just learned that the NBA is a business. He felt betrayed a little bit. He loves the city of Detroit, and I think he's taking it kind of hard, Steve.
Well, it felt like with the Whiteside was almost a similar deal. I mean, to where maybe, if like you say, if the market for Drummond is a second rounder, maybe Morton found out that basically nobody wanted to give up anything for Whiteside, and so they kind of figured, look, we've got Damian Lillard playing really well. We're going to get to the 8th seed. If nothing else, you keep your fans happy and you give yourself something to kind of watch for the last 32 games, and you hang on to Whiteside for that. And now it seems like the question is suddenly, is there a thought that they can bring Whiteside back next year, which I'm kind of it's annoying to me listening to people talk about whether they can or not because they're trying to figure out whether or not he can play with Nurkic. Well, I sit here and guess at it. There's a pretty good chance that over the last 20 games at least of the season, we're going to see both those guys together and get a chance to see if they can play together or if not. So it's like everybody's sitting here trying to guess as to whether or not they can. It just makes sense to me. I think we're going to get, Nurkic sounds like he's been a little bit of a return on the delay, and when he comes back, he's going to be worked in slowly. But I think there'll be enough of an opportunity to get an idea between those guys and see if they can play together.
Yeah, what I think happened, Steve, is Nurkic had a initial return date for right after the All-Star break, and he had been ramping up his activity in practice, and he suffered a calf strain, and I think that might have set him back a little bit. And I think Portland, almost isn't sure if Nurkic is going to come back sooner rather than later. So I think if they weren't absolutely blown away by an offer for Whiteside, I think they're like, you know what? We're going to keep this insurance policy. Dame's playing at a really high level. Olshey even said something earlier, too, or right after we didn't make a trade. Everybody was upset on Twitter. Everybody was upset everywhere. And Olshey kind of said, listen, the best trade that I made for the organization was by not making a trade because we're going to get Nurkic back. So there's not a player on the market we could have got better than Nurkic when he comes back from that injury. So I kind of agree with him. I kind of don't agree with him. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, the thing that'll be interesting to me is to see. I mean, I'm all for hanging on to Whiteside. I mean, I think, again, you're a team now that's going to, I think you can play your way into the playoffs. And I think anytime you get a chance to get in the playoffs, especially if, we talked about this before, if you miss the playoffs, you're maybe the 12th pick. If you make the playoffs, you're the 17th pick. I mean, there's not a huge difference of that in terms of your draft capital. I'm not sure that, I would think if they could have made a deal of Whiteside to get somebody who, is under contract next year and kind of help them next year. Clearly that wasn't out there. And so I think you hang on to him at that point. You kind of tell Dame and CJ, look, you guys have been playing your butts off. Appreciate you guys doing that. And instead of pulling the plug on this season and just giving him up for a second-round pick like they did for Drummond, we're going to keep this guy with you and give you something to keep playing for and get in the playoffs. And I mean, who knows? Maybe suddenly you get in the playoffs and Nurkic is getting back up to full speed. Doesn't sound like Collins is going to be back now, but maybe suddenly you're a strange matchup for a team that suddenly doesn't, if they end up with Houston somewhere and Houston's got no centers and suddenly they've got two, I think maybe they feel like at least just kind of hang into it. And if you weren't going to get a whole lot for Whiteside, just kind of ride it out.
If you can somehow get into the 2 seed and play Denver as opposed to the Lakers, you've got a shot because you have a history of success against that franchise. Now, I'm not saying it's a sure thing. I'm not saying we're going to get swept. I'm not saying it's either thing. I just have a better of a chance, in my opinion. What you said, though, is really interesting. If you had Nurk and Whiteside available for the entire 48 minutes, you would basically be throwing a top 10 center at the opposing team's defense the entire game. That's really interesting.
And maybe there's a potential to where there's a 4-minute segment where you try them out there together and see how it works.
Yeah, that would be a Twin Towers situation, like a Samson and Olajuwon, Duncan and Robinson deal.
Yeah, I mean, people say it can, and it'll be interesting to see, and personality-wise, it'll be interesting too. I mean, the Whiteside thing, I think Whiteside's having a great contract year and probably feels like there should be a 5-year, $150 million deal waiting out there for him, but I don't know if it's there because I just don't know that teams trust Hassan Whiteside at this point to give him a whole lot of years. So it may end up in a situation where they have his bird rights, and next year he's not getting a ton of 5-year, and Portland could give him like a 2-year option and see. But I think they'd also check with Nurkic. We saw where Nurkic got kind of disgruntled in Denver because he was, playing behind Jokic, and he thought that, he wasn't playing along really well there. So neither of these guys have exactly worked really well with others, and so that's why I think there's a possibility that they come back and play together and they realize that, man, this isn't going to work and you can go that way then. But I think it's worth giving a shot. Again, assuming that, Olshey didn't turn down any sort of a great deal, we won't know what was out there, but I'm assuming he didn't get anything that he thinks helps him out a ton next year. And so you ride it out, see what these guys can do together, and maybe that suddenly becomes sort of a weird matchup. And, if maybe there's only like 5 games where in the end of the regular season where Nurkic is up to full speed and the team they're playing in the playoffs really doesn't know exactly what these kind of two can do together, and the Blazers can kind of cross people up that way.
Yeah, I think that the Houston Rockets kind of did something similar just now. They're going all small ball. They don't have a player on their roster right now outside of, I believe,
Tyson Chandler. I saw Tyson Chandler on the bench. He's there. He's not playing, but he's there.
Tyson Chandler's over 7 feet tall. PJ Tucker's 6'5". They're doing something completely different, and it's working so far. I don't know how much it'll work in the playoffs, but if the Portland Trailblazers can switch up the scheme that they've been running and use both centers, I think it's very interesting because that's going to leave a lot of shooters open out on the wings and out on the top of the key. So I think Dame and CJ could maybe thrive and even flourish in that situation.
Yeah, we look at Portland. Portland's still 24-20. I mean, this is still going to be they're going to have to play really well to get into the playoffs. I mean, you're looking at that's 40, 52. You got 30 games left in the regular season. They're 2.5 back in Memphis, which basically just got rid of Iguodala and added Justice Winslow. And I know Winslow's been hurt and hasn't been playing a ton, but I mean, they got better. They got rid of a guy who wasn't playing for them, as Dylan Brooks said, a guy who didn't want to play for them to trade for a guy who does want to play for them. So if nothing else, they help themselves there. And then there's just such a gap between that 8 and 7, though, that it's like, they're 7.5 out of the 7 spot right now. So there's really no way they can get up to there. If you're looking at trying to get to the 2, you would need sort of the Nuggets or the Clippers at this point to surpass the Lakers. That becomes your better chance than any sort of Portland getting anywhere above the 8.
Yeah. Hey, so you were talking about that Grizzlies trade. We have a family reunion in Memphis. Jordan Bell is back with Dylan Brooks.
Yeah, no, that'll be cool to see.